Welcome everyone who's joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from.
I wrote a sticky note and put it on my computer that says, be the sponge.
There are some school-specific sponsorships which make you feel like more inclined towards them.
While you're an MBA, you have an unprecedented access to a lot of people, be it alums, recruiters, or your professors, your career services. Make the most out of your time, talk to people, get a clear understanding of what you want to go into.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about top MBA application pitfalls. My name is Scott Edinburgh. I'm the founder of Personal MBA Coach, and as you just saw, the spotlight is coming. So definitely, please register. Log on. It'll be a great event with a lot of top business schools. And as a reminder, for everybody here, please like, share, comments, and that really helps these videos. So. Please interact with us throughout the process. So we'll talk to you a little bit about top application pitfalls. And for those of you that aren't familiar with myself or the company, if you haven't seen these sessions before, my name is Scott Edinburgh. I'll tell you a little bit about Personal MBA Coach. You'll hear from a former client of ours, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation. So we've been doing this since 2008. Top ranked in a number of different websites out there. I've been invited to speak at the annual GMAT conference in previous years. And overall, we have a 96% success rate. Last year, everybody that we worked with actually pretty much got in. And we got over $10 million in scholarships. Boutique, family operated. We work 7 days a week. Everybody has the opportunity of working either directly with myself, the founder, or former top admissions director. And we're actually hiring some other admissions directors too. So we'll more on that soon. We have top clients that you can network with at all the schools and a pretty robust project management system. So again, a little bit about me. I went to MIT for undergrad, studied at Sloan, was a teaching assistant for one of the MBA courses as an undergrad, worked at Deloitte in consulting for a few years, also worked in finance, travel, and in hospitality, and then went to Wharton for my MBA. Picked Wharton because in high school, did a couple summers of economics courses there. Really liked the curriculum and wanted to go back for the MBA. I'm also joined by MJ Shores, who's a director on our team, former Wharton and UCLA admissions director. We have Nicole Shea on our team as well, who's an advisor. She used to work at Columbia Business School. And again, we'll be adding one or two more top M7 admissions directors so we can have all the AdCom directors to help you out if you'd like that. I also run the company with my sister, Erin, who used to be a Forte scholar, worked at Bain & Company in consulting, as well as Mars and US Airways, and went to Yale for MBA with a pretty good scholarship. So, what do we do? We can help you throughout the whole process. We'll get into more of what we do at the end of the presentation, but from early planning, figuring out what your story should be, how to differentiate yourself from others. We have a top team of former MBA interviewers from M7 and other top schools, and editors from top schools as well. So, Harvard PhDs, Yale, Columbia. And so we have a really robust process from start to finish to figure out who are you, what are you about, what are your plans, guiding you through how to improve your profile, right? What to do between now and when you apply, and then helping through the essays, the resume, the rec letters, and all that. And if you want any tutoring, we have some of the best tutors in the industry. I'll tell you more about our tutoring at the end. We have 2 more evening slots available, and then some other daytime slots available as of now. So next, we're going to go to play a video from a former client, and then we'll come back to the presentation in a minute.
To business school was the route I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to leave it all on the table. I wanted to give myself the best chance to get into sort of my dream program. That's kind of how I first came in contact with Scott. I was doing some research on various admissions consultants, and his name kept popping up and it seemed like it might be a fit. So I reached out, we did an initial consultation, and that's really where I felt the standout kind of start for Scott and his team. Scott was very available, willing to sit down with me for an initial consultation. We were able to talk through high-level details about my application, what schools I was thinking about, what schools might be good fits. And I really found that first 30-minute session to be very productive and sort of start that process of working with Scott and his team. After that, I did some thinking and ultimately decided that signing on for a full-service 5-school package would be best. We landed on applying to Harvard, to Wharton, Columbia, Booth, and Duke. for various reasons for each, but all sort of fit what I was looking for from a program, both geographically and content wise. I think what really stands out to me about Scott and his team is just the level of diligence sort of across all phases of the application process. We started first by really outlining and defining the story that would make most sense for me. I had to do a lot of work to think about, based on my experiences, my skills, the schools I was applying to, what was going to be the story that really made the most sense. From there was a lot of work to be done on my resume. I honestly hadn't touched it since undergrad, so had to do a lot of work, very, very nitty gritty, kind of bullet by bullet level revisions to make sure that every single word on the page was exactly what I wanted it to be. Huge attention to detail and persistence from Scott's team to kind of get that across the finish line. And I really felt that carry over through the essay revision process as well. I felt that his team was incredibly responsive, incredibly detail oriented, sort of always giving me good pointed feedback on how to sort of update and edit my essays, but also kind of giving me the runway to make it my own, right? I don't think that they sort of overstepped their bounds and maybe wrote the essay for me. It was very much, nudging me in the right directions to make sure that what I was putting forth was the best representation of my application. I think the other thing that really stood out for me was interview prep. Again, I came out of undergrad, started with a consulting firm and worked with that firm, all the way through my time until I went back to school. So I hadn't really interviewed for anything between when I left undergrad and when I was applying to business school. So I found those interview prep resources really, really helpful. For example, the Wharton interview process includes a team-based interview where you work in a group of 5 or 6 to kind of come up with an idea together. This was an entirely foreign concept to me, something I'd never experienced. And Scott and his team helped put on a couple different practice sessions so that I could get comfortable and really feel good walking into that interview with Wharton. Overall, I had an incredibly positive experience with Scott. I was accepted to 4 of the 5 schools that I selected, ultimately landed on Wharton because I thought it was, the best opportunity and the best fit for me. I can't say enough about the diligence from Scott's team, his willingness to sort of roll up his sleeves and really sort of look at my essays and my resume down to the finest detail, and also his responsiveness, knowing that he's juggling a ton of different priorities. He was always available, always able to get me feedback in a timely manner. So I can't recommend working with Scott enough. I'm confident that he improved my applications to business school immensely. I can't even quantify it. And like I said, highly recommend working with the Personal MBA Coach team.
Okay, great. So now we'll go into the application pitfalls. So top 15 pitfalls to avoid. If you see things here, try not to do them. So first is having illogical or vague career goals, right? Your goals should really make sense. If the goals aren't natural, you might want to explain this. So what this means is, often people make a change where they maybe do a new industry. If you want to do a new function or a new geography, maybe you want to work in a different country where you're speaking a different language, right? These are all different changes that you would be making. If you're making a bunch of these changes, right, try to explain why you're making these changes. If it's not natural, right, explain that. In general, you really want to be decisive and specific with this process. And we can talk more about goals at the end, where we have other slides where we're talking more about the goals. But really here, in general, it's really important to be very specific, very, very decisive throughout the whole process when it comes to your post-MBA career goals. So the next is going to be recommendation letters, right? And asking your company CEO to write your recommendation letter. So unless you really work closely with your CEO, they might not be the best choice. And apologies, I'm a diabetic. I might actually need to eat something for a second. So prestige doesn't matter, right? When it comes to rec letters, the title, the responsibility, how high up they are in the company, that's not really that important, right? What matters is that they're going to write very, very good and specific things about you. Sometimes people ask me, well, what if I have a boss that's going to write this, or I have, another manager that's going to write that? What do you think I should do? I've worked with this person for 1 week or 2 weeks or 9 weeks or 10 weeks. By and large, right, ask the person who's going to write an amazing letter. That's really going to be the most important thing. The quality is super, super important. They should know you well and be able to really compare you to others. And if you have someone who you've worked with outside of a work setting, maybe in like a non-professional setting, that would be good. Maybe if they're going to talk about things that, maybe otherwise wouldn't get talked about if you just asked the boss to write the rec letter. So resume, and we have some more slides on resume at the end of the deck in case we don't get a lot of questions, or because I like to pause in the middle. So what we'll do is we'll go over the top pitfalls, pause for questions. If we don't get as many questions as sometimes we get, we'll have more time to talk about resumes at the end. But using job description bullets on your resume. Again, as a reminder for those just logging on now, definitely try to like this video, like it, share it, comment it. Comment on it. That really helps. So ask any questions in the comments section, even if it's just, hey, good to see you again. That would be amazing. So highlight your strengths, right? Show leadership. You don't want to just have a bullet that explains your job, because if you write something that's going to talk about the role that you've done, and let's say anyone else could have written this in their resume, it might not differentiate you, right? So the idea is to differentiate yourself throughout this process, and doing so in the resume is definitely important. What this means is including specific, right, and ideally specific and also measurable results. So you're not just saying what you did, but you're saying how you did it, who you worked with, right, what the results were, and try to establish key skills that you have. At the end of the day, you did work better than someone else, and that's what we want to do on the resume. A couple more things on the resume. Sometimes people write like a lot of content in the resume. The idea is not to maximize the page. You can do it. Sure, when I was in undergrad, we had these one-page cheat sheets for exams, and someone in my dorm types out fonts and like size 2.5 fonts, and you had to really go like that to read it. That's not the idea here, right, behind the resume. You want it to be easy, quick to read over, and just make it really, really comfortable for someone to go through the process. So I want white space, right? Okay. Next is not including school specifics. Right? Avoid vague statements that could, really apply to any school. As you're writing your essays, think about what the school is looking for. So if you're applying to a school that knows they're good at something, let's say Wharton in healthcare, or Harvard in the case method, if you spend 20% of the essay writing about how great the case method is for Harvard, it's not going to help you to get in because they know that. Show research and interest in the school. And so you really want to be clear that you have the details and you know why you want to join their unique campus for a school that asks you about this in the essay. And they might not ask you about this, and that's okay. At the end of the day, show the value that you'll add and be very, very detailed about the school. It's easy to call BS on these things, right? We read these essays all day. Admissions directors read them all day and all night. And it's very clear to see if someone's done their homework or if they're writing something that's specific enough. So next is mentioning a vague reason for wanting an MBA. So you don't want to just check the box, right? If you're in consulting and you want to get the MBA and everybody at your firm does it, or you're in finance and people are really doing it, or whatever the industry is, you want to be specific. So let's not just check the box. Let's talk about what you're going to gain specifically from the program and why the MBA program is going to help you to accomplish your goals. And level set here, right? Level set with what skills you have, where are there gaps. Try to avoid things that maybe aren't too specific. So business knowledge, right? You don't want to get an MBA to develop business knowledge or to learn strong fundamentals. That doesn't mean anything, right? What are you saying? Everybody wants to learn business knowledge and everybody will do that. So I won't accept you because you write that, right? So you want to be very clear about what it is that you need from the program in order to get there. So to give an example, right? If I really want to develop my public speaking skills, maybe I'm an engineer and I've been coding all day and I want to run a business. In order to run a business, I need to raise funds and to start a company. In order to do that, I need to figure out how to present my pitch to other audiences. So I'm going to take crisis communications at Wharton so I can learn these skill sets so I can develop my own presentations and win, right? So that's an example of having something that's specific. Next is not answering the question. This seems silly, and it's a funny, silly picture here. But look, joking aside, right, answer the question. So if you see an essay written by a school and they don't ask about something, let's say they don't ask about your goals or they don't ask about why the school or something, it's probably for a reason, right? It's probably because they don't actually want you to write about that. So really focus on answering the question. And by doing so, you're going to make yourself look as good as you can. So I know it seems obvious, right? But schools put a lot of thought into these questions. And if you're working with a coach, right, maybe we have some inside tips and we say, Columbia doesn't ask about classes in the first essay, but it's kind of nice to write about them. So we might tell you that. But unless you have that, be very, very specific. So some background context is okay, but you don't want to spend a lot of time writing about the background. And sometimes people do this. They have this personal story about grandma, and you learn this, right, through grandma taught you XYZ, and you have this whole saga, and it sounds great, maybe for Stanford, right, for what matters most to you. But if you're writing a short goals essay, try to be very specific and to the point. And last sort of bullet here, schools place varying importance on specific criteria. That's really key to know, because every school is going to be looking for something slightly different, and you don't just want to copy and paste across the schools. So next is using too many buzzwords. Try to avoid using too many buzzwords, because what happens is if you write something that, an admissions director knows about, great, they might be an expert, right? You might be having your essays read by someone who's a former consultant and reads all the consulting and private equity resumes, and they'll know these buzzwords. They used to work in the industry, but that doesn't mean you should write about it anyway. Because one, you don't know who's going to read your application. They may or may not be an expert in your space. And two, you really want to have experience writing about yourself in a way that you can take that experience and translate it to, let's say, a happy hour once you're at school and you're talking to somebody who's not in your industry, and you want to have experience doing that. And that's what you're going to have to do at school, right? So you want to be comfortable doing that. So technical terms, right? Try to avoid the technical terms. Instead, let's focus on transferable skills, results, personal characteristics, things like that. The resume and cover letter are going to be different from what you're going to use in a job application. And so you might want these keywords to get a job, but you don't need the keywords to get into business school. There's not any specific skill that business schools look for when accepting applicants. I'll say that again. There's not any specific skill that business schools are looking for. Looking for a wide variety of different things. And so don't worry too much about the really, really unique, nuanced, skills and sort of buzzwords that you might have. Next pitfall is lacking consistency across the application, right? So these are pieces of a puzzle. So I was teaching my kids how to do puzzles this weekend, and how to do smaller puzzles. We go from bigger puzzles to smaller puzzles. Well, these are kind of like the 1-year-old puzzles, right? So you have 10 pieces. This isn't a 100-piece puzzle. But even when you have 10 pieces in a puzzle, they should fit together, right? And you want to make sure that you're showing what makes you unique in this process. And so if you have a theme, right, the theme should be carried forward throughout the application. An application that's not going to be consistent, it won't look like it's very genuine. So again, try to be consistent throughout the application. You want to have a story. You want someone to read the application, go away from the read, and say, okay, these are the 5 reasons why I want to take Scott into my business school. But this doesn't mean you want too many red and white bikes, right? You don't want too much repetition. You only have so many essays. Let's say if you have 3 essays and you use the same story for all of them, it's too much. I was just consulting a client on MIT essay. This is for their deferred program, where after you apply to MIT, if you're lucky enough to get interviews, you have to write 2 more essays. So we're doing a lot of editing this weekend for folks that are writing their interview essays. And this one particular client wrote the same story in the essay, the interview essay, and they wrote in the application. And so we flagged it and said, let's actually not do that. So now we're going to come up with a new story that's going to convey something different, right? Because you only have so many different pieces that you can talk about. And if you have a cover letter and you have a video essay and you have a diversity essay, right? Let's have the diversity essay be different from the cover letter. So yeah, again, don't sell the same story twice. Next pitfall is not properly engaging with the schools, right? So admissions directors are people, right? And they want to know that you like them for some schools in some cases. So you have to think about this. It's not a level playing field in the sense that Harvard does not look at engagement, right, in the same way that maybe Columbia would. So talk to students, right, from the schools that care about that. Go to events. I wrote 10 virtual events just because everybody's all around the world, right, in these events, these these webinars with GMAT Club. But if you have events that are in person, that's great. Schools travel to events, go in person. You might see me at some of these events. Do the MBA fairs, right? Ask smart questions as well. So engaging is important for some schools. Some schools care more about this than others. Like Columbia, MIT, they care a lot about that. Next pitfall is giving up too early on testing. And if any of you saw my presentations previously, this is a new one for us where we're adding a few more pitfalls. So I think this is a really important pitfall. And sometimes people say, well, I've taken it 3 times and I've done X, Y, Z. I think that's enough. Well, first of all, it's never enough until you get your score. So if you don't have the score that you think you want, keep going. If you're watching this live, it's May. We are far from any deadline. So don't give up. We have so many clients that I convince every year to retake a test. And usually they improve the score. Usually we help them to improve the score through our tutors. Our tutors have 99.5 percentile, 780 and higher GMAT scores, really, really robust system. And we can definitely help you. But whether you do it with us or on your own or use a book or something, keep going, right? That's the main message is don't just take the test and then say, well, I want to get the score first. Once I have a score that's good enough, then I'll apply to school. That's not, in my mind, the right way to go about this because the applications have a deadline. Columbia's rolling, so there's not an exact deadline. And as long as you have a score by then, that's fine. You don't need a score before you start doing the essays. Then you'll give yourself an artificial deadline that will stress you out, probably lead to a lower score, and will just reduce your chances of getting in. So I know that's a strategy that some people employ where they get the test and then they do the applications later. But I think giving up too early on testing is a really important pitfall. Just keep taking the test. Change the style, right? Do a class. If a class doesn't work, do a tutor. You can take it online. You can take it in person. In some cases, you can take the test after you submit. So sometimes we have clients who say, okay, well, fine, it's August 31st. I'm done. Let me just submit. They take their books and they throw it in the bonfire for that weekend. And they get in a wait list and they say, oh, no, I'm on a wait list. I guess I should have kept studying, right? So I would say keep going. If you get a higher score and you're interviewing, what's wrong with going into an interview and saying, I know you have me as a 720, but I just got a 750 last night. That'd be a great way to open an interview, right? And whether the school officially or doesn't officially take that score into consideration, it's a really nice way to start an interview. So I would just say keep going if you don't think you have a score that you want. I know I'm vague because everybody's different. Everybody will need a different score based on demographics and what country you're from and your job and all of that stuff, right? But definitely keep going if you don't think you've reached your full potential. So next is overusing optional essays. Most applicants won't use an optional essay. I'll say it again. Most people don't use an optional essay. So if it's optional for a reason. If they really wanted to hear from you, they would just make it required, right? It's not that hard. So the reason why they're optional is because in some cases they want to hear from you, but in many cases they don't. So focus on what they're asking in the optional question and pay attention to the wording. Optionals are not the same for every school. Some schools, we see 50% of our clients write an optional essay. Some schools it's 5%. In some cases it might be higher, but not usually. So focus on really truly extenuating circumstances and keep them simple. If they give you 250 words, it's not a 250 word essay. It's optional. If you can write 2 sentences to explain why you failed a grade because you had to get surgery and the teacher didn't allow you to retake the test another time, that's it. That's 2 sentences and that's the essay. So again, like less is better than more. And these are really not essays, right? With some exceptions, like London Business School has an optional essay that's kind of like an essay, right? And we see about half our clients use that. So that's a little bit different. But for most of the schools, optionals really explain extenuating circumstances, failing a grade, gap in work experience, medical issues, like those types of things. Next one is forgetting to be humble, right? It's a balance here because we spend a lot of time bumping people up, giving them confidence, right? Telling them you can do this, coaching them on interviews, being proud of your accomplishments, but at the same time, maintain humility. You want to pass the airport test, right? The airport test, for those of you that don't know it, is some firms, a lot of consulting firms and others, will think about the airport test when they're interviewing people, meaning would I want to sit in an airport with you for 3 hours while the flight's delayed? Do I want to sit next to you? Do I want to hang out with you and chat with you? You want to be a nice person, a person that people want to be around. That's important. And so you want to be humble. I was in this webinar. I'm giving slightly different advice than others, but you can watch a lot of our stuff. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Personal MBA Coach. Again, remember to like and comment this video. We have a lot of resources on our page, personalmbacoach.com. You can visit if you want other real core materials, like advice on a lot of different things in the process, a lot of downloadables and guides. But here I'm just going into a little bit more depth because I think it's helpful. You want to be thoughtful, and so you want to be humble at the same time, and don't forget that. It doesn't mean you can't sell yourself, right? You can talk about all of your accomplishments, but just do it, humbly. Like I say, I got more reviews last year than any consultant in the world, right? That's an honest statement about me at Personal MBA Coach. Maybe that wasn't the most humble, but if I say that, I'm going to say that I did that, but at the same time, it's important to find the right fit and find the right consultant, et cetera, et cetera. So volunteering a weakness that was not asked about. I wouldn't say this is a common pitfall, but it's something that's worth thinking about. Because sometimes I see people write about stuff that they don't have to write about, right? This is an open application. They don't know you at all. So you have to think about what you're conveying and what you're not conveying. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying to omit anything factual. You can't leave out a job or leave out a degree or something like that. But if it's subjective, like I'm really bad at, public speaking and I messed up every talk that I've given ever, right? Well, maybe you write that, maybe not, right? Let's think about what we actually want to convey to schools. Your essays provide limited opportunity to sell yourself. And so primarily focus on strengths and accomplishments. Now, there's certain things that you want to be looking to improve upon, and it's fine to be honest, right? And to talk about improving in some areas. But if you're discussing a growth opportunity, you don't need to necessarily highlight a failure. The letters of recommendation are going to be used to highlight weaknesses and failures. But for you, I would probably not do that. So it can be like, here's what I've done to date, and then this is what I want to do going forward. And so focus a lot on what you have and what you want to do without really getting into the weakness, I would say. Next is waiting until the last minute to start your essays. So if you're watching this now and you're applying in round one, open the computer and start writing. Round one is coming. We already know the questions for some of the schools. We are well underway working with applicants. Now, if you're not ready yet, that's okay. But for those people that are reading this, watching this, listening, you don't have to wait until the end to start the essays, and you don't need a test score. I know I said this before, but it'll take a long time to do the essays. I mean, you're thinking like 2 to 3 months to go through the process, maybe for call it an average of 6 schools, and so you don't want to just do this at the end. So start early. It's like voting. Vote early and vote often. Start early and start often. Definitely is a good time to kind of get moving. And when we see people rush at the end, and we do that. I mean, look, if you're rushing and you're watching this, it's August, and there's space. A lot of our clients finish early, so we actually have more space at the end than at the beginning. But your essays won't be as good. So I'm much better off to start early in the process. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Personal MBA Coach, especially for those of you that join late. You can work with me if you want as the founder. I'm the most reviewed consultant, industry veteran. We have only top senior consultants. We don't employ anybody who's a recent graduate, a student, an alum. Our consultants are very senior and very experienced. And so you have a former top admissions director as a consultant, or myself as a founder. And those are the folks that are on our team. And then we have editors. And so our editors are some of the most experienced out there, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, all masters and PhDs, many full-time. And so day in and day out, we're writing, we're editing, really going over feedback, multiple internal meetings a week where we're talking through clients and that sort of thing. And our clients got over 10 million in scholarships last year. And these are some of the schools that they got into. I'll briefly talk about the process. I'll go to questions. I'll pause for questions, and then I'm going to go over some more content as well. So tutoring, if you want help with tutoring, right, we have in-house software that you can use for the GMAT. We're starting to build up, thought for the GMAT focus, right? It's not too early. It's too early to take the test. It's too early to really study for it yet. but we're staying on top of it. That's going to be coming soon. For now, just think about the GMAT. We do the executive assessment as well. And tutoring is very personalized. We'll focus on your strengths, focus on your weaknesses, create drills meant for you, walk you through the whole process, guide you through everything from start to finish. Usually people do 20 hours of tutoring with us. And again, we have a couple more evening slots available as of now, evening in EST, and then some other time slots throughout the day as well. Personal story development, right? Figure out the schools. The school fit is kind of important. Sometimes people pick schools based on rank, and that's fine. Or you can pick schools based on fit, chances of getting in, career prospects, all of that. And if you want to know more about the process, please reach out. Now, I know there's some links here about signing up with us and working with us. We do offer free consultations for those interested in working with us on the applications. We do not offer free consultations just to chat about you or your background. So if you review our packages and you have the budget to work with us, we'd be more than happy to schedule a time to talk with you further. So we'll go to some questions. And then after that, you can see we're going to start to talk a little bit more about the MBA resume. So let's go over the questions now, and then we'll come back to this. If you have any questions, please feel free to type it in the YouTube chats, questions, comments, concerns. Okay, so how about tips on passing interviews with alumni? Usually with AdCom, we could do the interview clearly. Or with an alum, there are a lot of uncontrollable situations. You're right, very uncontrollable. For starters, right, when is it even going to be scheduled? When will you hear back? The process is tricky. And I've had people wait weeks before getting an interview. Then they show up at a bar. It's loud. They thought it was going to be in a coffee shop. But, the interviewer's ordering drinks. The whole thing is just different. That might be the process, right? Alumni have different ways of doing interviews. And, they're all kind of okay. So I would say try to make a connection with the person, right? The benefit of having an alum is that's just a person who went to business school like you'll be. So consider this like a friend. They might be closer in age to you maybe than an admissions director, or maybe not. Do research on them. If you know them, the benefit of an alum is you know the person ahead of time, right? Most likely because you're emailing them and coordinating what Starbucks to meet at or whatever. So look them up. Right? Stalk them online. Figure out who they are, what they're interested in. Try to strike up a conversation, develop a relationship. Ask them about themselves and their experiences. People that interview candidates do it because they like business school. They like the community. This is not a requirement for alums to do this, right? So people that are doing this really want to talk. They want to talk about their experiences. They want to learn about people. So ask them questions, get them talking, and that will probably make them feel happier in the process. And then just think about, avoiding questions that are super, super narrow and focused on the school. So if it's like, I'd like to do this initiative, what are the ways in which the school is thinking about launching this new curriculum related to, crypto in the developing world? They might be like, I don't know, man. Like I graduated 10 years ago. I have no idea, right? So think about who your audience is and what questions you should be asking to that audience. They are more random, but, a lot of people do alumni interviews. Okay, so feel free to keep asking the questions there. I'm going to pause here for a second and go back to the presentation, then we'll come back to more questions at the end. So professional resume versus the MBA resume, right? The professional resume sells you to do a job. And you have to talk about certain experiences and skill sets that you have in order to do that job. The business school resume, I mentioned about this a little bit before. They want to see that you've been successful and demonstrated leadership. So it's not so much about the skills, but I want to see leadership. I want to see success across a variety of different verticals. So we'll jump into the letters of recommendation, right? Some additional things I want to tell you about the letters of recommendation is you can start doing things that you want written about in the letter, right? So this is my LOR strategy slide. Of course, again, before ask someone who write an amazing letter, ignore the title. We talked about that before. Start to do something that you want them to write about. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're working at a company. Your work is not very analytical. It's not very quantitative. And you think, now I'm going to business school. I need to showcase the fact that I'm really good at analysis. How can I do that? Well, let's start doing things, right? Do a project, take on something. Even if there's not a specific opportunity to do this, you can just create that opportunity. Maybe you are looking to help your company research how to better I don't know, open a new office or something. And then you do market research on city density and, number of college graduates, or depending on what your angle is and what your company is. You could just do this whole analysis and presentation for your boss, and maybe they want it, maybe they don't want it, but it could show your abilities. And then later you ask them to write about a recommendation letter, and you say, maybe you want to touch on some of the analytical things that I've done lately. Ask them early. What does that mean? You can start now if you want. You don't have to if that stresses you out and you think, okay, it's too early to do this, and I think that my recommender will get upset or something like that, then that's fine. But you can certainly ask now if you want to. And try to give a couple months, call it 4, 6, 8 weeks to sort of go through the process. Take some time to write the letters. Remember that your application is not submitted until the recommendations are in, for the most part. So if you're applying to Columbia and you want to get your application in June, and your recommendations aren't in until the end of August, your application is not submitted until August. And then influential or alumni letters. A lot of people talk about this. Don't worry if you're sitting there thinking, I'm in Pakistan or Mumbai or South Africa, and I don't have people I know here who can write a letter for me. That's okay. But if you do, and you have somebody who's a friend or a colleague or a neighbor who is an alum of the school or a student, then it's nice to have them endorse you, maybe 1 or 2 letters. So what's going to make a good letter? Specificity, right? How have you grown in the past? Don't just tell me how you've grown. I want examples. Recent, what does recent mean? It's different for everybody because I don't know how old you are, but at least in like the latter half of your career, hopefully, as far as rec letters, if you have 6 years of experience, you don't want to go back to years 1 and 2 from the first job and then leave a gap in the middle job of 3 years, right? You want the letters to be somewhat recent. Some schools really want recent letters, and other schools don't care, but it's still better to have them be a little bit recent. Honesty, right? They should be honest. What that means is there should be negative things that are talked about in your recommendation letter. Now, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that you don't want to talk about your weaknesses necessarily, but your recommender can, right? Because they ask those questions in the letter. What are some things that they need to improve upon? And then again, having some detail. So let's talk a little bit about goals, because a lot of people want to hear about the goals, strategy for approaching the goals. Well, they should be specific, ambitious, and attainable. What does that mean? Let's start with specific. Specific means I'm not going to say, I'd like to work in technology and be a leader. Obviously, that's not specific. That doesn't say anything. But even if you say, I'd like to work in product management and advance products for consumers, still not specific enough. I want you to tell me what it is that you're going to do. So far, you just sort of talked about the job, but you didn't tell me what it is that you're going to do within that role. So I want to be clear and know what's your role, what are your contributions that might be different from what someone else's might be. Ambitious is, it's something that's, moving you up the ladder, right? But attainable means you're not jumping too far. So avoid the terms CEO, partner, just delete those from your memory for this process. We don't want to be the CEO or a partner of anything in these goals, unless for you that makes sense. If it's a family business, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're already the vice president and the next level up as partner and you will get it in 2 years guaranteed, okay, in that case, yes. But otherwise, no. You do want to include target titles and companies, right? So that you can show the schools that you've done your research and it's not too high level. And you want 1 short-term and 1 long-term goal. If you have multiple things that you want to do, then you want business school to help you to find out. Don't admit that, right? That won't help you get accepted. Schools want to take people that know what they want to do, and you want to show them that you do know. Now, you can decide what you want to do and then go and change your mind later, and that's fine, but you do want to have a plan. If you're going to go back to, let's say, consulting, or you can fill in the blank, finance or nonprofit or whatever, that's a good goal, right? Going back to your company is a good goal because then they will hire you and you're more likely to be employed than if you have another random goal like a venture capital partner, but you still want to be specific about what you will do in the role and show that you have the level of detail to explain it, rather than just saying, I'm going to come back and do my, same job. Now, as far as what you'll accomplish, it depends on the essay and how long you have to write about the goals. So we'll go over some guiding principles for writing essays. And as you have any questions about any of this stuff, just feel free to ask questions, comments, like things, and then we're happy to answer. So answer the question that's asked, right? Consider the why. Now, this is important for some schools' essays. So let's take Stanford. What matters most to you and why? I was just talking with a former admissions director actually last week. So what matters most to you and why? There's kind of 4 parts to that question, right? You have the what. What is this thing? You have the why. Why does this matter to you? You have the maybe what have you done with this thing? And maybe what will you do with this thing going forward? The why is pretty important. So I could be very involved in eradicating forest fires around the world. And that's a pretty important topic. But if I don't have a reason for that, I don't know if that makes the best Stanford essay. Because why did I do that, right? If it's not connected to something about me or my story or my background. And if you want to learn more about story development, jump on our website. We have a video on story development, and it's on GMAT Club's YouTube. I think it might be on our YouTube as well. Ensure that the essay is going to fit with your story, and it will connect. Try not to repeat yourself and keep the language approachable. This is actually important, the last bullet here, because it's a balance, right? You don't want to have very basic writing that is just so basic, it won't get you accepted to a school. A bunch of 8-word sentences or something like that. But at the same time, you're writing an application to business school. This is not a Pulitzer Prize winning book or some interview with a senior politician that's going to be published in the New York Times. This is an essay, and it's short. It's 300 words. It's 500 words, maybe 600 or 900 at the longest. And so you want to keep the language approachable. Admissions directors read many essays a day, and you want it to be an easy read. So if there's a lot of tough words that are, you have to think about what that means, and it's just a more advanced writing, it might not actually help you to get in. So it might seem, not so intuitive that I say keep the language approachable, but I actually think that is important, and I've seen it work out well. So we'll get into some specifics of the essays now, actually. So Harvard, right, as we review your application, what more would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy? What do you want to do here? Maybe have one key story. Maybe approach it thematically. The webinar we gave last week with GMAT Club, we talked about story and story development. So you can go back to that one. What are some potential topics? Maybe it's a passion, it's a value that shaped you, some issue that you overcame, some kind of experience. Note, I'm not talking about Harvard in this essay, right? You don't see the word HBS anywhere on the slide except for HBS essay tips. Why? Because you're not going to write about HBS in this essay. It's not required. Now, if you do, and it happens to be part of your story, that's fine, but it's not something that's actually required. The essay should be interesting to read. And I'll probably say that again. Essay should be interesting to read. It should be a fun essay. Don't try to throw everything in here. Even though it's an open-ended question, it doesn't mean that you want to tell them everything that you know about yourself, because then what's the theme, right? It's just like, oh, my life story of I did this, and I did that, and I did this, and I did that, and I did this. That's not exactly this essay, right? Professional experiences, there's always a question, do I talk about professional experiences? And if you ask 10 experts, you'll hear different opinions. You might hear 5 in one camp and 5 in the other camp. There's not a formal right or wrong answer here, but this should be a more personal essay. I'll just leave it at that, and kind of let you figure out what works for you. But it's a more personal focused essay. And the last bullet here, goals and why. Don't do that. Don't write about the classes you want to take and the clubs and all these executive speakers you want to join at Harvard. That's not what they're looking for. So Stanford, right? What matters to you? Think about the personal story. Take a risk here. We had a client once, this was many, many years ago. He's now venture capital partner. Speaking of writing VC partner, this is a consultant, but this is many years later. And he started his essay with numbers and ended it with numbers. It was really cool. Derek Bolton at the time, mentioned to him how he thought it was like kind of different. And at first I wasn't totally on board. And then we decided it actually worked out. It was just a different approach to writing. So I'm not saying to have some hologram or like it's an essay, you're typing it up and then submitting it. But you can take a risk here at Stanford. Most people don't get in anyway. And so if you want to take a risk and gamble here, this is a school to do it with. So again, you want to balance the why and what. Try not to make it feel forced or overly boastful. And then really try to speak from the heart here. And then essay B, right? Brief professional context. So a pitfall here is making this all about Stanford and all the amazing things that Stanford has. So the question is, why Stanford? But it's not what is everything that you want to do once you get on campus, right? That would be a different question. And so you don't just want to list a whole bunch of things and all the reasons why Stanford is so amazing and the weather's incredible, Silicon Valley, access to entrepreneurs and access to capital, and a great student environment and really down to earth and collaborative. Don't write any of that because everybody writes that stuff and it's not specific. So we want to be very specific to you and try to be unique if possible here. Not that you're going to write something that nobody will ever write, but try to make this you, right? So if there's something specifically that attracts you to Stanford's campus or culture or some event that they have, you might want to think about that versus more general things that a lot of people don't write about, like, well, good for startups and Silicon Valley and, small class and that sort of thing, which is kind of pretty well known. So I'll talk about the Wharton first essay, although it's possible some of these things might change a little bit, where they have just a goals essay and you want to establish some context, talk about what you've done so far, talk about your goals after business school, and then what you want to do at Wharton. So the question is, how do you plan to use the MBA program, Wharton MBA program, to help you achieve your future professional goals? You might consider your past experience, short and long-term goals, and resources available at Wharton. This is a pretty straightforward kind of goals-focused essay. If you're thinking of order of doing the work, though, you might want to start with schools that, let's say, a little bit easy, sort of straightforward, and also not that likely to change the questions. So like London Business School won't change their questions next year. INSEAD won't change their questions. Columbia won't change. Stanford won't change. So there's certain schools that we know. And other schools we're like, let's maybe wait on. I'm not going to talk about Wharton Essay 2 because that actually might be changing. So any questions so far? Let me flip back to questions to see if there's anything else to answer. So let's talk a little bit about number of schools. So how many schools to apply to? On average, we see people applying to 6 schools. That's the most common. We have a lot doing 7. We have a lot doing 5. Typically 5 to 7 is what we would see. I recommend doing them all in the first round. I think that's going to just help you to get in. It's the best time to be applying. Now, if you're watching this and it's November, don't worry. I mean, round 2 is fine too. We do a lot of work in round 2, but round 1 is going to be preferred. And then you want to have some targets, some reaches, some safeties. It depends how much you want to actually go versus this is a little bit more opportunistic. Okay, so go back to Chicago booth. So essay 1, this is a pretty similar goals-focused essay. The one thing I'll note here is the minimum count. So 250-word minimum. Now, that's not maximum. Some people misread that, and they write a 250-word essay. And that's it's not going to show that you're really trying a whole lot. So let's make this more like a 500-worder. And then essay 2 is use this opportunity to tell something about who you are. So this is different, right? This is more of that like Harvard, Stanford type of writing, but something about who you are. So it's one thing, and it's about who you are. It's not really about what you've done. And so make sure to keep those 2 things in mind. Columbia has a goals essay. Through your resume and recommendations, we have a sense of your professional path to date. What are your career goals over the next 3 to 5 years, and what is your long-term dream job? And so what we want to do here is talk about the goals, right? Talk about what you've done in the past. Talk about how Columbia is going to help you to get there a little bit. but this is mostly a goals-focused essay. Whereas essay 2 is all about Columbia. So why is Columbia a good fit for you? And they threw in last year, they added these words to kind of help out applicants academically, culturally, and professionally. So what this means is you have to have multiple reasons. And you want to definitely do research and show them that you know the program and you know what they have to offer. And without getting into too much guidance, that we'll say that the more specific this is, the better. And don't forget about New York City. So that's what I'll say there. Anyway, if you want more guidance on any of these, sign up with us. We'd be happy to help you through the process. So talking about Kellogg, right? Kellogg has a question about leaders. Kellogg's purpose is to educate, equip, and inspire leaders who create lasting value. Provide a recent example of time when you've demonstrated leadership and created value. What challenges did you face and what did you learn? So what I'll say here is personal or professional is fine. It's a beautiful picture. If you're getting distracted like I am, Kellogg is a gorgeous campus. You can be on campus, have this building on the water, lovely place. Professional or extracurricular for this example works really well, right? Talk about challenges that you faced, and they should be real challenges. They ask about challenges. They ask about how you overcome the challenge. Well, they don't say that, but obviously you want to overcome these challenges. If not, it's probably not a good essay to be writing for you. And then maybe you're talking about learnings in the future. Like, this is not a future-focused essay. When these essays for Kellogg first came out a few years ago, there was some back and forth. I remember reading some blogs where people said, let's still write about Kellogg, and I never quite understood that. We're not writing about Kellogg here, right? So this is not an essay about Kellogg. This is an essay about what you've done in the past. And this essay is about, again, what you've done in the past, your values, what values are important to you, how have they influenced you. It's not a Kellogg essay. So it's not a time to spend half the essay to say, well, these are all things I want to do at Kellogg to live these values out. Instead, you're kind of looking in the past year. Why are they important to you? How have they integrated into your life? Again, values and kind of view here. And the thing about values is they're different for everybody. So if you don't have an answer to this one, this is probably one of the harder questions that we see, because sometimes people just don't have, something that comes to mind from a value standpoint. And so you have to be creative. Think about this. Ask a parent what they think your values are. It'd be a weird thing to say, but sometimes I've seen moms help out with this a lot. Sometimes I've seen a friend help out. Sometimes I've seen a consultant help out, right? Where we really dive into things and help to figure out what it is that's important to you. And then we'll talk about the MIT Sloan cover letter, right? So for those of you that applied to a job and you wrote a cover letter for that job, this might be similar to that, in the sense that you're talking about what you've done, you're talking about what you will do, you're talking about why you're going to be right for the school, right? And so that's what you're doing in this cover letter. But it's very, very detailed. And I won't go through all the advice here. Some of this you have to sign up with us to get. But to be honest, the Sloan differentiation piece here is talking about why Sloan, but not so much like the classes you want to take and all that. What are you going to do to help Sloan? That's one little tip that I'll say here. So again, accomplishments, keep Sloan's value in mind, etc. Okay, so now we'll go back to this slide and back to questions. So here, I'll just leave you off here. Okay. All right, so talking about approaches for testing, right? So you have the GMAT, you have the GRE, you have the executive assessment, you have the GMAT focus, you have waiving the test, right? That's 5 different options. A waiver should only be done as a last resort. It's May. To say that you aren't able to take a test for the fall at this point feels a little premature. So I would try to advise all of you not to waive, honestly. But certain people, it's more important. So let's just take the, someone who's not able to take a test because they're working in a school system in a developing region, and they're working 13 hours a day creating new curriculum in Africa. All right, so maybe that's a waiver scenario. If you're an Indian male working in consulting or finance and you waive the test, that's bad news. Don't do it. nobody else is going to weigh the test that you're competing with. So I just don't recommend doing it. As far as GMAT versus GRE versus executive assessment versus the GMAT focus, again, GMAT focus, don't worry too much about that now, because if you want to apply in round 1, you can't do the focus. That doesn't come out until the 4th quarter. So I wouldn't think about it quite yet. But for the GMAT versus the GRE, if you're better at quant, GMAT. If you're better at verbal, GRE. But GRE has a lot of vocab. The executive assessment is kind of a nice option if you want a little bit of a easier one, a little bit shorter, a bit of a backdoor way into some of these schools. But think about where you come from. So if you come from let's say, competitive, overrepresented background, they might be more likely to take the GMAT. And so while the schools, quote, accept the GRE, it doesn't mean that you will look as good if you take the GRE. And then also, the quant is going to be easier on the GRE, so something to keep in mind as well. Okay, so what does it look like this year? So this year, it looks like it's going to be a little bit more competitive, but not crazy. This is a really good time to be applying, because we're coming off the heels of a year where schools didn't have as many people applying as they wanted. Let's put it that way. We're entering into a year where there's a recession and more people are interested in applying and more layoffs, but we haven't seen it all materialize yet. I mean, if you look at objective numbers besides, what consultants do and who we work with, just like test centers, like number of tests, number of individual, people, the numbers aren't crazy yet. And so I think it's a really good time to be applying now, but try to get in the first round, because the prediction is by second round, we'll have, some more of these recent layoffs coming into the mix. So again, if you liked this, like the video, comment it. Remember to go to the GMAT Club Spotlight. That's coming out very, very soon. Register for that. That'll be a lot of fun. And for those of you who have any interest in working with us, happy to have a chat. First chat is free. If you are interested in doing a package with us, jump on our website so you can review our packages, prices, and offerings. And I'll be more than happy to schedule time to talk about this further. So wishing everybody the best of luck in the process. Thank you so much for sticking with me throughout the webinar, and I will see you very soon. Thank you, GMAT Club.